Hello and welcome to our When I Dare to Be Powerful conference talk. This is the second in our series of online conversations and podcasts that we're having relating to voice as an agent of change running up to our one-day conference in June. Links to our previous talks with Professor Athazia and artist Ali Zlata can be found on our website. Please do visit our website where you'll be able to find out more about our one-day in-person conference taking place on the 21st of June, along with full details relating to our podcasts, online talks, and of course the conference programme itself. The conference will bring academics, filmmakers, artists, writers, and activists together as we spend the day considering what voice means to us and hopefully also provoke thinking relating to voice as an act of resistance. You're also able to register to attend. We've still got a few places left, so please do be quick. The link to our website is When I Dare to Be Powerful Conference, all one word, .wordpress.com, and you'll also find the link on the New Art Exchange website. Please note that tonight's event includes live automated closed captioning generated via Teams, and that this may include some mistakes. We're grateful that our When I Dare to Be Powerful International Conference and Talks have been sponsored and supported by Midlands 3 Cities, Midlands 4 Cities, Bonington Gallery and New Art Exchange. This evening, Trang Dang will be in conversation with Jasmine Qureshi. Trang is a postgraduate researcher in literary studies at Nottingham Trent University. She was funded by a Nottingham Trent University studentship scheme and previously graduated from Oxford Brookes University with a BA and an MA in English literature. Her PhD project focuses on Jeff Vandermeer's weird fiction, and Trang will be interviewing Jeff on the 24th of May about his work, so please join us for that if you can. Registration details are on the Bonington website. Thank you for joining us this evening. Over to you, Trang.
Thanks, Patricia, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Jasmine, for agreeing to be with us today. And it's a real pleasure to be able to talk more about your work and your activism, which I think is so needed and important and inspiring as well, to be honest. So first, I'm going to give the audience a quick introduction about you. So Jasmine Qureshi is a writer and a storyteller. She also a wildlife television and media researcher, previously working at Wildspace Productions on a series for Netflix, BBC Natural History Unit, BBC Earth, and South Films. Jasmine is also a freelance wildlife filmmaker, an ambassador for the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, an engagement officer for the youth-led lecture organisation A Focus on Nature, an activist and a marine biologist. She's passionate about wildlife conservation and the environment and can usually be found on the coast, combing for marine life and exploring the ruins and new builds of our urban jungles, and speaking and writing far too much about insects and arthropods. I love arthropods. Via different media, Jasmine has shared her passion for topics such as diversity in workplaces, politics and how it affects science and nature, but also the social sciences, sexuality, identity and gender, particularly trans rights and the understanding of these. And I also know that she's just founded an organisation called Queer Brit that explored the idea and practice of queer ecology and that raises intersectional awareness through centering queer people of colour in nature. And you can find more about her work at darwoodswildheart.com. So in terms of how the evening will play out, Jasmine will first give us a short presentation about her journey of understanding who she is and what she does and the role that plays in her practice of intersectional storytelling and in her idea of queer ecology and its importance in understanding not just the environment but also gender and identity. And then Jasmine will read us some poems, and after which I'll just kind of ask her some questions relating to the interview and the presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So yeah, whenever you're ready, Jasmine, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just want to say first, it is an honor to be invited to this. The topic that I'm talking about is very, very close to my heart, and something that I've almost stumbled into, not by mistake, I would say, but through my own journey and how I've grown in this industry. And it's something that's so close to me in that aspect because it is something that I've grown within myself. And so it's almost coming out of my mouth now as words, and as a presentation and as the work that I do, simply because it has been something that has helped me grow. And that is my journey. But very much what I'm going to be talking about is that. And so I'm really honored to be able to talk about it to an amazing audience. And obviously I know Trang from social media, and I love all of their work and all of the things that they're working on. And so when they reached out, I was like, yes, of course, I would love to do that. So yeah, I would like to say that first, almost as a sorry for being a bit late to the meeting where we had to work everything out, but we're here now. So let's get on with it. So this title slide, I titled it as how I have led me to become myself, because that's how I dare to be powerful, is to really show the intrinsic personal side of me in the work that I do. So if we could move on to the first slide. So you basically explained this already pretty well, but in terms of who I am, that is very much a core part of my work. And so I like to describe the variety and diversity of roles that I've managed to have, even though I come from a background that is nature, that is conservation, that is amateur naturalist almost when I was very, very young, and then moved on to marine biology at university, and now do work in writing, journalism, and I do a ton of stuff. And I use this to show people that you can do such a large variety of roles when you work in conservation, when you work in ecology. For me, science communication is all about that. It's about diversifying these areas of interest. It's about diversifying these areas of thought, because oftentimes we think of ecology, biology, science as very much binary, straight-laced, very systematic, emotionless subjects, where you can't have all of these other passions, where you can't inject the skills that you've learned in your hobbies, where you can't put your opinion into the writing that you have. And we're taught about this. I remember myself when I was doing my dissertation, and when I used to write a lot of my essays at university, too much of my opinion would get into my writing. It would often be turned down so that I could write something else that was very much so far away from what I usually write and how I usually write. And I found that bizarre, because I was doing journalism alongside my university degree. So I was interviewing ecologists, I was interviewing wildlife television presenters, I was doing work for magazines. And I found that these ecologists and these scientists were 90% passion, excitement, and everything that they'd learned in their hobbies, everything that they took in their personal lives for themselves and their morality, they took it into the field with them. And they used that to become better ecologists and better biologists. And so it was really bizarre to me that I had to cut that out almost to become a good quote unquote scientist. And that had a big effect on me as a queer person. So as someone who is trans, queer, from a strict Muslim background, who's also Pakistani, I have a very intersectional identity. I cover a lot of ground with simply saying who I am, and being the person I am in a lot of these spaces. So for me to cut out the personal connection that I have to subjects almost cuts out all of me, because that's how I've grown to love myself and to understand who I am. It's through that introspective, reflective perspective that I've had of myself. And I've had to grow with that. And so for me, cutting that out meant I almost couldn't do science. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about, and a lot of the work that I do, is about injecting that passion and that interest back into not just science, but into writing and into every other topic that I work in. So, for example, I have worked as a researcher for BBC Natural History Unit, for Netflix, for a few indie productions now. And for me, when I think of filmmaking, it's a branch, it's an arm of storytelling. Storytelling for me is one of the strongest tools that humanity has ever used as a form of communication, as a form of changing perspective, as a form of building narratives. And we know that changing perspectives and narratives and telling a story is intrinsic and very much core to changing people's minds about science, to changing people's minds about the climate crisis. And I found through this that I was unable to simply attack almost the problem of climate crisis, of biology, of my interest in ecology and arthropods and marine wildlife from a strictly scientific and systematic point of view. I had to look at things like poverty rates in certain countries where the climate crisis is affecting the infrastructure more. I had to look at who was there. I had to look at why they were being affected more. Only then, because looking at that intersection and looking at those layers of identity, only then could I then understand more how we could solve these problems, because we found that on the surface, and I found this through my work as an ambassador and through my work as a writer for these various magazines and through my work talking to CEOs of organizations like the RSPB, like the Wildlife Trusts, like overseas organizations that deal with conservation, I found that oftentimes their boardrooms are an echo chamber of opinions. They are people talking about the same thing at each other in different formats, and they can't understand why they're not able to solve a lot of these problems. And it simply is because no one's calling them out and no one is offering a fresh new perspective. And it's because everyone in that boardroom has a similar lived experience, similar education level, similar financial level. And that is not intersectionality, because intersectionality is about this almost this soup, this meeting point of different identities. And only when you have lived experience of real intersectionality in terms of the most minoritized and most marginalized groups of people, who oftentimes are at the intersection of most identities that we deem other than normal, which I think for most of our society is cisgender, straight, white, masculine presenting, male, that sort of thing, able-bodied. These are things that are considered the norm. And so we veer away from that and we find the most marginalized people are the most intersectional people. And once you dissect that intersectionality, you then understand how to deal with a lot of the climate and environmental issues that affect these people, because they only affect them in the way they do because of their intersectional identities. So that's why I want to talk about, and that's why I like to talk about my different roles that I've had, because they very much relate to who I am as an intersectional person. A lot of the time, a lot of the reasons that I do a lot of the jobs that I have done is because of my intersectionality. My start in journalism came through talking about my status as a person of colour in reserves in the UK, and how I found it very hard to feel comfortable in areas of nature that I previously used as areas to go to feel comforted, to feel calm, to get rid of my anxiety. And I found it was being spiked. And it was because of my status as a person of colour. And then as I came out more, I started to talk more about my sexuality, about my queerness, about why natural history is taught wrong. And that's what my organisation is about. Queer Roots is about centering the most marginalized voices in ecology and conservation, not just to get these people into nature and conservation when they have never been allowed to or have had easy access before, but to change the entire way that we teach biology and ecology, because we teach it in a format that very much curates itself to the most privileged of our society. And it's because teaching, education, and science have often been quite elitist in the way they are taught, in the way they are strategized, and in the way they are learned. And this manifests itself as binary learning, and it manifests itself as a very simple structure in terms of teaching people one thing and then asking them to unlearn it and learn a new thing, and then asking them to unlearn it and learn a new thing. So that's what Queer Roots is about. It's about taking away all of that mess and trying to reestablish spectrum-based learning. And I'll talk about it in a bit, but that's kind of what my book's about as well. So next slide, please. So again, I've talked about this a bit, but telling stories via different mediums, that's what my work's about. Whenever people introduce me onto a stage, whenever I talk about anything, I start with, well, except for this talk really, because I didn't do that, but I start with, generally, I'm a storyteller. First and foremost, the core of all my work is storytelling. I love storytelling. I grew up with books. I grew up reading stories and trying to intertwine them into my own life. I grew up homeschooled, which meant that for the first few years of my life, I had to build my own stories around my own existence. And I grew up in a very sort of urban cityscape. I never really got to go into big areas of greenery and what is stereotypically known as natural history in the UK. I wasn't really able to get near a lot of that stuff. And so I had to build stories about it based off of what I watched and based off of what I read. And so I've come to find that my talks, my filmmaking, my poetry that I'm going to read later, that I've only recently started, are ways of expressing the feelings and the opinions that I've had in natural history that I've never been able to express before, and that I think make me a better ecologist and someone who's more useful, but also having more fun and being more creative and enjoying the subject a lot more. And you find that people who enjoy the subject a lot more are definitely better at the subject, because it allows an ease and flexibility around how you learn and around how you teach that subject. And people know and understand and feel that ease. And so I think a massive part of ease is flexible learning and flexibility in the perspectives and understanding you have of the subject. And that comes through comfortability and security. And I found that through my acceptance of myself to tell stories. Next slide, please. Again, I've talked about this already, but each slide is simply me delving deeper into all of the layers that I'm introducing you to. So intersectional storytelling is one of the types of storytelling that is probably the biggest part of me right now, and has been the biggest part of me for a long time, but maybe I didn't realize it. Like I said, I'm someone who comes from a lot of different environments, a lot of different areas. Growing up with a Muslim background, my understanding of religion is quite strong in terms of Abrahamic religion, in terms of one area of religion. And I've used that to deal with a lot of issues throughout my life. And I've oftentimes had to come face to face with a lot of people who view religion and God as the core sustainer and aspect of existence. And if you talk to someone who's a scientist who hasn't grown up with religion, they come at it from a very different angle. And so these two often butt heads. So I find that my lived experience as someone who grew up quite religious, came away from it when I realized it was limiting me in my own identity and was causing me a lot of mental health issues, and then came back to it when I realized that my connection to my culture, my connection to my spirituality was really more important to me than how I'd been taught that specific type of religion. And so I came back to it. And that means that with my lived experience of the religion and with my current understanding of it, and also my passion and my interest for science and natural history, I can attack the problem from lots of different areas that other people can't. And I find this with a lot of scientists who are religious and who not only accept their religion, but also accept their intersectionality and the diversity of their identities. And so I think for me, it's always been about linking up the dots. It's always been about reflecting on my own identity, understanding where I come from different areas, and linking those things up so that I can draw a map of who I am, and I can use that to understand other people. And that's been a core aspect of my journalism. I think the best and the most useful way of analyzing anything is to go to the source of that thing, to go to the beginning. Because in going to the beginning, you go back down all of the routes that this river of information or whatever it is you're dealing with, this subject has come along, and you find what obstacles have changed its course. You find what guided it to where it is right now. You find every single little bit that makes it what it is right now. You find that in going back to the beginning, and that journey along to find where it started, and then finding where it started and where it began, can also take away, I think, the false hierarchy of a lot of subjects. So you find that with science, especially with natural history, you have this hierarchy, you have this gatekeeping that happens. And it happens because for a very long time, historically, it's been a very gatekept subject. It's been a subject that's only been accessible to the quote unquote highest or most highly educated minds of society. And the most highly educated minds of society are who? The most privileged. And so it's been a subject that's only been accessible to them for so long that the systems that support it and the systems that we teach it by are still really only accessible by the most privileged. And so that means when someone comes along with a lot of passion, but not a lot of knowledge, they are often turned away. And so I think for me, going back to the beginning of where a lot of subjects started, removes the false hierarchy of these subjects, because they aren't subjects that never changed. They aren't subjects that have never ever been uprooted and redefined. They aren't subjects that started off the same as they are now. And once you understand that, then you get a better idea of flexibility. And I think this idea of flexibility is very much core to intersectional storytelling. Like I've said, it's about diversity. It's about a lot of different points from a lot of different areas and a lot of different perspectives. But it's about understanding how quickly things change, and that things do change, and that everything changes. I'm a great believer that everything always changes. There is nothing that exists today that exists in the same way that it has existed even a second ago. I think as everything changes, we feel the need to question it more. And then we come to the real core of science, because science is the art of finding out. It's the art of asking questions. So if you understand how things change and the intersectionality of everything, then you understand how to ask questions better. And you know, and you find yourself being more confident and having more autonomy with asking questions. And for me, that leads on to my point about transness and about queerness. My journey with being trans and with being queer started with coming out as gay and not really understanding who I was. I very much had to look into the science of gender and the science of queer theory and the history of queer theory, because, like I said, I'm always someone who wants to know how things work, and I want to know where stuff starts. So I almost wanted to know, why is what I'm feeling told to me as being wrong? And how can I remove that false hierarchy from the people who are telling me that it's wrong? And along that way, I had to experiment with gender identity and transness. And I realized that to be trans and non-binary as I am, and to be queer, is to be other. It's to be other than the stereotype. It's to be other than the norm. And that helped me so much with understanding ecology, because there are so many aspects of ecology and biology that aren't understood simply because they're phrased in a certain way, simply because a certain word is used, simply because we look at a subject and we think it can only be one thing or the other. And if it isn't, then we'll force it into one of those two categories. And if it doesn't fit completely fine, we'll cut away some of the information so that we can force it into those categories. And that limits the progression of science, don't you think? Because I think so. I think it limits the progression of science. I think it limits the progression of thought. And I think it limits the progression of society. Because if society is homegrown on this idea that nature, as an unchangeable, written in stone force, is a binary, then we grow up thinking that, well, you can't dissect that binary. You can't dissect gender norms. You can't dissect hierarchies. You can't dissect patriarchy, because it's written in stone. It's nature. That's what nature is. And that's very dangerous to society, because it really limits us in terms of what we can do. It creates dangerous aspects of control, and it does away with autonomy. Being trans for me is very much about building a flexible and safe space where people can question and grow to control their own autonomy. And in doing so, they grow to control their own minds and thought, and they grow to be better questioners, better dissectors, and better analysts. Analysis? I don't think that's a word. Analyzers, that's a word. Better analyzers of the work that they do and the work that others do. So, of course, to understand queerness makes you a better scientist and a better ecologist, because it puts you in that mind frame and that mindset of nothing is set in stone, everything can change. That doesn't mean that everything is chaotic, but it means that everything can be questioned and there are new perspectives arriving all the time. And to me, that's extremely and amazingly exciting. And I find the idea of queerness and queer ecology exciting. Next slide, please. And that's what this is about. It's about queerifying biology, ecology, and pretty much everything. Basically, it refers to the fact that biology and ecology, as I've just stated, has this human core to it. when we learn about it. Why? Why, when we learn about it, do we think this must be how this works? Because as a human, I work this way, so therefore nature must work this way. Because you can only really explain objects, understandings, ideologies, subjects from lived experience. You can't really explain something beyond your own experience because that would require thinking beyond who you are. The way to stop this becoming everything is explained as per one person's ideology is to get lots of people in on it. That's how you counter that, is to put fresh perspectives and new people and new understandings into that room so that everyone is coming at it from a lot of different corners. But with queer ecology, it's about taking away this anthropocentrism of biology and ecology. Now, with anthropocentrism, we're talking about how we view humanity, how we view society, and how we take ideologies, beliefs, and structures that we have developed via society, for example, binaries, for example, hormone levels adhering to gender identities, to sexual identifiers, to roles that these play in society simply because of manifestations of flesh, which are used as gender identifiers. It seeks to dissect these ideas, and it has its roots in ecofeminism. It has its roots in gender theory, in queer theory, and simply this idea that the status quo and the stereotypes and the societal learning that we have right now is based on a system that was curated by the most privileged, in this instance, the cis white straight male. And that is called patriarchy, because what patriarchy does is it centers a lot of the wants and the needs and the observations of the most privileged. And it means that everything is put through that filter. And then when everyone else learns about it, they learn it through the observations of this type of person, which means that a lot of us become othered in this conversation because we aren't seeing it through our own eyes. We are learning and seeing and learning to see it through the eyes of a specific type of person. And so with queer ecology, it seeks to undermine that. It seeks to suggest that whilst this ideology and this view, it shouldn't be done away with because people do see things in that way, we should not be teaching everyone that this is the foundation for all learning in terms of biology and ecology. And especially this is not the way that we want society to be built, because it is based on the most privileged. And if you base societal workings and if you base the structure of society, which is built around communities and mutual aid, and therefore should be built around helping people and helping our most marginalized, it cannot be built from a view that is blinded and ignorant to the struggles of those people. So it's very much got its roots in socialism. It's very much got its roots in understanding of politics. But at its heart, it's about ecology. It's about biology. It's about science. It's about telling us that the world is quite magical. It is as magical and strange and glorious as films, as fantasy books that you read. And simply because it's science, that doesn't mean that it needs to be this binary subject that is supposed to be boring, because it's not. It's incredible. And it allows a greater awareness of the flexibility of wildlife and nature. And as I've said, because of our need to understand and learn about subjects from our own lived experience, we should get people with more diverse experience. And that comes from the queer people of color in our community, who understand wildlife and nature from their own perspectives and understanding of life, which is often filled with a lot of reflection and a lot of retrospection of their own identities, because we fight a lot of obstacles throughout our lives. And so we come to terms with the fact that society doesn't work for us in a lot of ways, which means we have to invent our own ways of existing. And through that invention, we then are able to see more flexible ways around topics. We are able to deal with problems in ways that will actually help us, as opposed to a system that has, from the beginning, I think, been flawed in its aspect of privilege, in this manner anyway. And if we are to talk about the science and the queerness of science in ecology and nature, examples might include clownfish, for example, which as a species, and I remember talking about this to a drag queen and then being completely mind blown by this. But the fact that, and many of you may know this, the clownfish as a species changes its sex at one point when the population isn't producing enough young or offspring. And this shows us that nature views sex and gender as different things. Because first of all, there isn't a gender identifier in clownfish that is set in stone. And the hormone levels are simply there to prop up the reproducibility of these species. And then we get an understanding that the hormones are not tethered to the identity of this fish. They are not tethered to its role because they are changed by the environment. And therefore, if they're changed by the environment that easily, nature has a very flexible, very non-binary view of gender identity, sexuality, and reproduction, and the roles that animals play and the roles that species play. And perhaps we can take something from that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is my last slide. And just a little thing about my organization. It has just started up. So at the moment it is just a page and a few accounts on social media. And at the moment I'm reaching out to allies, to people to get involved. So if you are a queer person of color and you want to work with me on this, hopefully at some point, because I've applied to a few funds, a few grants, will have funding to pay people to work with this organization. But I really want to center people who never have been able to get that voice out there before. So if you do want to be involved, definitely DM me or message me on one of these social media links. And yeah, I would love to be involved. But this quote, which is actually not really a quote because I said it, but it's a piece of writing by me that kind of explains everything that I think is important about daring to be powerful. So daring to be powerful is all about unlearning that which previously crushed you internally and relearning that which helps you thrive as the most authentic version of you. It's very much about understanding that the flourishing and the thriving of your most authentic, euphoric self is the most important aspect of yourself and the most important lesson you can learn. Because the happiest people and the most content with themselves are those that are still growing, still being flexible, still changing. And that makes them happier. And that is the most important part of existence, I think, is being content and thriving. And if the side effects of that is that you become a better writer, a better scientist, a better ecologist, a more excited person, then that's amazing. And they often do come as side effects of that. So yeah, I think that's what I have to say about daring to be powerful. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I mean, you addressed so many things in there, and yeah, I don't know, what did you notice me, but I was just nodding all the way through. Yes, of course, yeah, this is a message that needs to be sent out. Okay, so now Jasmine is going to read us some poems, and yeah, I'll let you get ready for that.
Yeah, no, I would love to, and thank you so much for listening. I'm just going to get the poems up right now. And do like wave a hand or something if you think it's going on for too long, and I'll stop. But yeah. So these poems I wrote for different reasons. But this first poem I wrote when I went to the first and as of yet most important part of my life when it comes to gathering all of my identities in one place and actually feeling euphoric and comfortable in my skin as a Muslim trans woman who also is crazy about nature. And this is probably the most important place that I felt that. And it was in London, and they'd asked me to come on as a poet. And I said, I'm not really a poet. I don't I wrote some stuff at home maybe, and I've written for, like, I don't do that. That's not really on my CV. And they were like, yeah, but we think you can do it. So why don't you do it anyway? So I wrote some poems on the coach, up to that place, and because I am last minute. And these are those poems which actually are some of my favorite poems that I've ever written. So this one's called I Am a Weapon. I am a weapon, or so I have been told. The soft subtlety of my brown skin, the fine hair shivering on the surface of my planet, the jingle jangle of my gold finery. I am a weapon, or so I have been told. Is a weapon if a weapon has never gone to war? Is a weapon if never weaponized? Is a weapon if a weapon it never knew it was? It never wanted to be. I never wanted to be. But born a weapon I am, born with a weapon. It drags against my consciousness. I feel it when I sit. I feel it when I stand. I feel it when I love. Flesh dagger hidden between my woman thighs, do you know what you are? Snake amongst the mice and wolf amongst the sheep, why do I take this badge of pain with me? Its glint smothers the sweetness of my love. Its choking, hacking smoke clogs the airways of my pride. I have a weapon, or so I have been told. I am not a fighter. I am not your enemy. I have the enemy's weapon, or do I? Why is this extension blamed when the men who leave rotten smells behind are left uncalled for? Why is my body brown and hairy and roughened by their touch now the spotlight for your worries? I am not a weapon, I never was. My shame and my tears are fuel for the fires that will burn the weapons from the earth. The true weapons, the monsters in the dark, the laughter behind my back, the grabbing of my fat, and the smiles as sharp as daggers and the hunger in their eyes, and then the bitter aftertaste of their anger because I am not as they expect. I am not your weapon. I am not your enemy. I'm not yours at all. I am mine. So that's the first poem. It's a bit deep and dark, but it's very much about the experience that I've found anyway, talking to a lot of trans women. And it's very much happening right now as a lot of anti-trans laws and policies are coming about, where the wrong people are being centered in a battle that has been fought for a long time to understand and dissect a lot of the issues that come with abuse, and that come with the false hierarchy, I think, of patriarchy and gender ideology, and heteronormativity, on that note. This is a slightly different one. This is called Dirt is Not a Dirty Name. Far outside of home, far outside of comfort, far outside of language that softens when it hits my cheek, walking alone and feeling adrift and of stone. Getting glares and stares, people care so much you are there. People care so much what the color is of your forehead and the shade of your hair. Dirt, they called me. Dust, they named me. Trust was maimed by thee. Throwing your insults and cutting my gut, I am the ground and I belong to it, they shout. They called me dirt. They say I am humanity soiled. They say I am their pure future foiled. But they called me dirt. They called me moist earth. They called me rich soil. They called me the lifeblood of our ecosystem. They called me the life beneath our feet. I am where the race begins. I am where the roots reach. I am where the earthworms teach. I am where the beetle grub learns. I am where the soul of our very planet burns. They called me dirt. They said I'm soil. But it seems they do not know. I am where their foods grow. It seems they do not know. We with brown skin are where your life is sourced. We with brown skin are the beginning and the end of your journey. Our skin is a symbol of the spices, the patterns, the knowledge, and the call of the wild. They called me dirt. Why would I ever be ashamed of that? That was read at the Naturist Museum for an amazing event that it was called the Explorers Program, and it will be happening again. And I would urge everyone to sign up because it's online and in person. It's one of the most affirming and incredibly beautiful nights I've ever been to. And yeah, it just combined intersectionality, religion, race, wildlife, ecology, everything. And it was amazing. not too many left. How many more do you think I should read? That's fine.
Well, thank you so much. These are beautiful poems, and I listened to your reading poems on Instagram before and always loved it. So I just want to throw it out there. Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to ask you some questions relating to your poetry, but also the presentation that you just gave us. So I think just to start, obviously you said you've been a lot of different roles. So sign communicator, storyteller, poet, and filmmaker as well. I just wonder whether you could talk a little bit about whether which role perhaps you find most productive and liberating in expressing yourself, or whether it's a combination of them that kind of offers something different every now and again that allows you to express yourself better.
I love that question, because I think sometimes people look at the list of roles that I've done and they're like, oh my God, you've done so much. And I kind of have to go, yeah, I have, because then they'll give me a job. But if I were to really explain it, it's kind of a stumbling around looking for something that is the most content to me, the most useful and the most progressive to my thriving. That's what this has been, this journey. It's been looking around for different roles and trying out a lot of different things. I would say writing has been the most useful to me. And that is one of the reasons I think reading and writing, and right now writing a book, is at top of my list and has always been the top of my list in terms of what I want to do, how I've wanted to do it, and just being able to research and write that book is a dream come true for me. But I say the most productive and the most incredibly useful way that I found of expressing a lot of the opinions and a lot of the feelings that I've had has been poetry. And I stumbled across that a long time ago, but only recently have started to use it as an actual way of putting my thoughts down. And I found it to be the most freeing format of writing that I can find, because you can do anything. You don't have to have punctuation. It's just the way you read it. You don't have to adhere to any of the rules of writing, really. You can write whatever you want in whatever way you wish. And it means that a lot of your emotions and a lot of your opinions that would normally get lost, I think, in the structural symmetry of writing essays or articles as a journalist, or anything that is edited down by someone else, a lot of that gets lost, and it's never lost in poetry. So I'd say being a poet, if I can say that's even a job, because I haven't done that much of it, would be the most happy I've been in expressing real truths about how I feel on subjects.
Mm-hmm. So before I ask a follow-up question on that, can you tell us a bit about the book that you're writing?
Yeah. So it's very much in the beginning stages. I have an agent, and we're talking about words. That's pretty much where it's gotten at the moment. I have pictures and proposals and bits of paper everywhere. But I guess it's about queer ecology, and it's about my own lived experience as a trans woman of color. It's basically about everything that I've talked about. It's about how, along the way, I've understood varying aspects of my identity and the intersectional aspects of my identity, and how I know there are people right here, right now, who relate to some of those identities, who relate to aspects of my lived experience. And I would like this book to reach out to those people and make them understand that the most magical thing that they have, and the most useful thing that they have to progress our understanding of ecology and biology, is literally themselves. And it's literally that they already have it because of that lived experience as a minority. And so it's about queer ecology. It's about the history of it. It's about my own life and how I grew up and where I've come from and why I'm on this journey in the first place. And it kind of interweaves and intertwines all of that together and tries to make it as digestible, as accessible, and as fun to read as possible. Because I think it doesn't matter how, I guess, much information a book has in it. If it's not fun to read, no one's going to read it. So hopefully that's the most important thing that comes out of it, is that it's fun to read and it keeps people absorbed in all of the words that it is. And by the end, you almost understand that you don't have to do stuff in the way that you've been taught. It's basically telling everyone to stop doing stuff as you've been taught it, which probably isn't the best idea for some people, but it's useful for a lot of others.
I think, yeah, the best way to do it, really, just to, change what is, considered normal and what's kind of not normal. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, to follow up question on that. So, do you write then to kind of understand yourself and the environment, or whether it's more kind of the other way around, where it's your journey and your process of understanding the environment and yourself that leads you to writing to kind of explore that further?
Oh, I like that question. That's multi-tiered. I think I write to understand myself. I think I study biology and I'm interested in ecology because I find it interesting to observe. And I think the only reason that those two things have become intertwined is because of the way that biology is taught, because it's taught in a certain way that is viewed in a certain manner, that is accessible to a certain type of person. And so my own identity has had to come into play because I've had to actually pull apart a lot of parts of myself to teach myself that I'm still worthy to be in this industry in the first place. And so I think if I didn't have the identity that I had, I would just be observing biology and ecology. That's because that's all I've ever wanted to do. It's just observe and study and really be enamored by the natural world. And so I think when I write to really understand those feelings. And I enjoy that more than simply writing a piece about nature that someone else has already written, or a piece about how things are studied. I think those are really useful. But I think until I can come to a point that I have something new to offer in terms of just observation, then I'll write a piece on just observation. But until then, I'll mix up all of my identity and emotion and flexibility as much as I can and as much as possible, because that's a different way of doing things. And that's how I've understood myself. So I think it's almost like I study for the sake of observing because it's really interesting, but I write for the sake of understanding and reflecting.
Did you? Yeah, definitely. And do you see, or do you kind of feel like you would one day kind of merge the two together, or have you been doing that already? Merging the identity, the feeling together with science, because I think there's such an issue in science at the moment. Kind of science being detached from subjectivity, feelings, emotion, all about objectivity. You have to push out who you are and how you feel about the subject, and just focus on the kind of kind of strict and unchangeable data in a way. So yeah.
I think I'd always been doing it, and I think everyone's always been doing it. There is no such thing, I think, as a neutral understanding or a neutral viewpoint on anything. Because as people, we do things in certain ways because of what we've experienced in our lives. We are who we are just simply because of the lived experience that we have. So of course our bias is going to leak into our studies. Of course it's going to leak into how we do things, even if it's without us even knowing. Try as we might, we never will be able to produce a piece of data that is completely unbiased. And what does unbiased even mean? You have to even dissect that idea of everything. So I think I've been doing things and mixing my identity into it since before I even could understand that I was doing that. And now that I do understand it, I think it's more useful because now I can understand why I'm doing it, and I do it with more purpose.
Yeah, I think I got carried away with all of my questions. I've got still so many more, but the next one will be on poetry. So you talked about skin colour in your poetry and how it caused you problems, and all that kind of issue that come with it. So just kind of focus on the conference theme, centering on voice. I'm just interested in whether you think about the relationship between skin and voice, and whether the skin has a voice, you know what I mean? So yeah, I just wonder, do you have something else to say more about that?
I think it definitely does. For me, I'd never thought that I could use poetry as a way of furthering my career. I never thought I could use it to further my own understanding of myself, because I'd never seen anyone with my skin color. I'd never seen anyone who looked like me using that tool. And we find the answer for why this is a problem is to go right back to the beginning and to look at the historical context of religious groups, of communities of migrants, you know, we could go into it for ages in terms of where they came from, where they settled, why they settled in those places, what that meant for their emotional maturity and growth, how they dealt with that, why creativity is so frowned upon in a lot of brown and black communities, why religious communities don't like creativity. And when we go through and split all of that apart, we begin to understand why we are the way we are, why I, as someone who grew up in a Pakistani, very much Islamic religious environment that was closely curated and directed by the older people in my life, and growing up as an AMAB person, so assigned male at birth, I was pushed down and limited by this toxicity, which is born of desperation and necessity of a lot of migrants and a lot of migrant parents. So I think it's very important. It's very important to connect the skin and the color of your skin and the observation and the way we have been taken apart and almost systemized into all of these different groups. It's very important to speak about why that has an effect on our words and the way we speak and why we speak about certain things and why we put more importance on certain subjects. Because even though flexibility is useful and veering away from previous systems of control is useful, we also have to understand that we grew up in this society. We have been built by this society. We have systemic trauma. We have systemic objectives and feelings that have been born of this society. These are very hard to get away from. So we could still use these systems. The system of skin color might be something that was created by an observational colonist group of people, primarily to categorize people. But we've grown up with it. And we grow up with the aspects of its control. We grow up with the aspects of what it has done to us in our communities and where we are today. So we still can use it. So I love exploring the beauty of my brownness through my poetry, because I don't see it. And I don't see, you know, you still don't see beauty being represented as different colored people, as different body shapes and body definitions. It's very much Eurocentric, the standard beauty. So for me, I use it to almost self-love and to understand that and to break down these systems of patriarchy and hierarchy, because I really struggle with them in today's world. And I think even the aspect of me going into speaking and talking was a way of me reaching another point of value in other people's eyes, other than my beauty, because I never understood that that was something that I could be without a value, an added on value. So that's a bit of a winding answer, but I think that kind of answers some of your question, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you know, talk about self-love and poetry, and obviously that, you know, kind of in a way self-representation of yourself, you know, putting yourself out there, because you haven't seen those in the world, you know, out there in the world, or, you know, abundant of them. So would you say that you see your poetry as a form of activism as well, you know, in a way that's kind of fighting against, you know, the dominant voices of, you know, white heteronormative cis males out there?
Yeah, most definitely. I see all the work I do as a form of activism. I see my existence as a form of activism, and not necessarily in a positive way. I read this quote by someone that was a suggestion that everyone who is called an activist for simply stating the views that grow from who they are authentically is forced to become an activist. They do not become an activist by choice. And I think I actually have become an activist via force. I think my existence and my identity in a lot of the fields I'm in, and the reason that I speak and I speak about things, has been grown from a necessity to create an environment where I even have a platform to do any of these things. And so I'm almost forced to become an activist. So anything that I do now that is against the status quo becomes a form of activism, in that it advertises it to other minority groups. It advertises it against an ideology that we've been forced to think. So of course it becomes a form of activism. Whether or not I think that's useful, I think it might be useful, but a lot of the times it is out of my control. And so I almost would veer away from suggesting to myself anyway that I want to be an activist. It's almost that I am, whether I like it or not, in this society. So, and I think that's the case for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just kind of circle back a bit. Obviously, we talk about, you know, kind of the relationship between skin and voice, but also activism. I was interested in how now you define what else voice means to you and what else activism means to you.
I think activism is anything, well, I guess in the most formal definition of activism, it's anything that's active against a system. But, and if anyone looks that up and it's wrong, I'm sorry. But I think for me, activism is an act of rebellion against the system. And most recently, it's been, I think, identifiable to me as rest, as stopping, as veering away from a very fast culture of capitalism, of corporate hierarchy, of very much efficiency, which I think, if you look at the definitions of it in current society, it often comes across as quite an ableist terminology. It often comes across as quite a charged term. And I think rest is something that's not a charged term. It's seen as neutral, as low grade, as lazy, as something that we're not allowed to do. And I was recently, actually, because one of the jobs that I do is as a mentor for creative writing candidates who are of marginalized backgrounds, and they want to talk about nature and write about it from their own experiences. And one person was talking about the relationship between light and ecology. And they were highlighting studies that talk about bird species and bird populations that are now being very much disrupted by false light in cities and artificial light, and how it's completely disrupting insects and animals. But she wanted to talk about why it's disrupting humans from a biological standpoint, and why our circadian rhythms and why the ways that our bodies work have almost been developed in our current forms as a resistance to sleep and to rest. And everything that we do, from working late into the night, is born of capitalism and efficiency and corporate hierarchy. So we can almost we can go back to why rest is an act of rebellion, because it's everything that this system is not. And so I think for me, that's what rebellion looks like. And I'm trying to teach myself that that's the biggest act of rebellion I can do. It's hard because I just want to be doing things all the time. And I also have ADHD, so I got to be moving all the time. But rest doesn't have to be stereotypical in what we've been taught is either. And I realize that a lot of the things I'm saying are they can be almost deemed unrealistic, just because, again, there is an understanding that we are of this system. So we can't do everything that we think is against the system. But, I guess we try anyway. And everything that you can do is a movement in that direction. You don't have to do everything or nothing.
Yeah, it's funny because part of my research looks at kind of, not being too active in activism, you know what I mean, but rather perhaps, in order to save nature, we might want to stop and just listen, just observe, right, and just see what is there. And I read several job posts on Instagram just talk exactly about that, and just thought, yes, that really kind of, resonate with me. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so what about voice then? How do you define voice?
That's a hard one for me, because I think the term voice is quite ableist in the way that we define it in society, because it's a suggestion that you have to speak up. It's not only ableist, but it can also be patriarchal in terms of who's allowed to have a voice. It can also be, it can very much other people in terms of how you speak, the efficiency of how you speak, if you enunciate properly, if you don't stutter, I know that when I speak, through, I guess, years of practice, I speak quite coherently and quite clearly and quite systematically. That's just the way I speak. But I would not suggest that this is a way to teach people how to speak. And I think having a voice should be something that is not a luxury. It is an accessible factor of everyone's existence. And it's a key factor of anyone's autonomy, that you need to be able to have a voice, because without the ability to voice your own opinion and to voice the need for control over any part of yourself, you lose a very key part of autonomy. So perhaps voice isn't about how we speak or what we speak about. And really, the avenues that we are allowed and the tools that we are allowed to speak things or to say things. And so I think that's probably the most useful format of defining voice. Is it's a tool. It's a tool that allows us to express. And there are many other ways of expressing, but none of them should be things that are inaccessible.
Yeah, absolutely. So almost like you shouldn't kind of define it as a physical thing, rather it's kind of a tool that can take many forms, you know, whatever that is. It could be a voice. Doesn't need to come from a person or you know, in a kind of again, physical embodied form.
Exactly. I agree.
Are we still okay with time? Because I still got many questions.
Rambling on a bit.
So I'm just going to ask this next question, and just, you know, as we talk about poetry, about how to choose word carefully, right? And I'm really interested in the use of word queerifying rather than queer, because obviously queer itself is a verb. You could just say, you know, queering this, but I don't know whether, you know, you want to say something more about why do you choose the word queerifying instead of queering?
Well, so I think queerifying it almost speaks to the gradual change of what I'm trying to do. Again, it comes with that foundational understanding that as we grow up in this system, as we learn in this system, we are imprinted with ways that we learn about things. We're imprinted with ideas that we have that are going to take a long time to unlearn, and they're going to take a long time to reteach and relearn in of ourselves and really understand that they are part of ourselves. So queerifying is just almost about how it spreads. It spreads slowly, chaotically, without any sort of system to it. It spreads to those that can understand and access it at various times. It's supposed to be a laid back manner towards things. Of course, the most important aspects of our society are in danger and we have to deal with them, but it should not be put on people to struggle and to put pressure on and to learn and structure things in a way that is too fast and too hard for people to understand at a leisurely rate, because that cuts people out. And we know that as people of color, that it cuts us out of a lot of races. And it also cuts us out of emotional maturity. And there are a lot of problems with it. So for me, I think queerifying just is a more flexible term. It's something that lends itself to ease. I didn't really think about it too much. I am now, but when I first did it. But I love the term queer because of its accessible use. It's very, very flexible and diverse, almost definition. It's not gay. It's not anything really, almost. You know, you can be queer without suggesting that your sexuality is affected by it. You can be queer without suggesting other things about the identity that comes with it. You can pick and choose parts of your identity, which is how it should be. The conversation is supposed to be there to be open to understanding yourself.
Yeah, I think the word queer is just so ambiguous that there's a lot of things that can come out of it because you can't really quite define it. So there's many things that can you know, be produced from that. I got signal that I got one question, last question to ask. I'm going to go ahead and ask that. So you talk about well, basically, you know, just kind of fighting for your identity, your way of life, you know, your authentic self. And obviously the system you're fighting against is just massive and it could feel quite overwhelming. And so I just wonder, how do you feel kind of standing up against that, and to sort of, you know, to other people who are going through the similar journey, how are you going to tell them to kind of navigate that journey and navigate that struggle, perhaps, to, you know, just become themselves?
I think finding community and finding support systems is the most important thing that I could ever tell anyone to do. Because I think it's quite a lonely fight. It's quite a struggle because you can feel very much othered by a system that suggests that everyone should do something. And if you're fighting against the status quo, it means that you're probably part of a very small group of people doing a very small amount of things. And it can often feel like you're fighting this giant machine. So having places to rest, having communities to go back to that fill you with more euphoria and validation about your identity and about yourself and about the ideas you're fighting for is absolutely essential for your mental health, which should be the most important factor of you and the health of your body and the health of yourself. That's the most important part of it. the fight is there to allow us to be more comfortable in ourselves. So having a sense of comfortability and having a place to be comfortable in yourself surely should be the most important part of that fight. So I would say support systems and community is the most important part. And what Queer Roots is trying to do is build a community. We're trying to build a community. That's what it's supposed to be about. It's not about creating an organization that performs in a certain manner. It's a community that then is able to be flexible and reach out to other communities. That's what I would prefer it to be. And that, you know, that is very politically charged. I would not veer away from politics. I would not veer away from structuring it as something that has a deep impact on the ways we talk, write, speak, and even suggest ideas and understand things, because it is all about that. And we shouldn't be scared of suggesting that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We actually got a question from the audience. So yeah, I think there's time for one last question. Last. Okay, so it's a question from Valentina, and they ask, I want to ask you about how you approach writing about biology and ecology. You talked about how the accepted language of science, academic, hierarchical, patriarchal, is limiting because it does not acknowledge emotion and storytelling as a valid pathway towards understanding. How do you navigate this in non-binary writing beyond poetry?
Badly. I started trying to write about it, and I failed because I was trying to use the language that I was taught. I was trying to use the language that I thought was passable as someone who is educated, as someone who understands science, as someone who is trying to express thoughts in a certain way. And I found the words were not pregnant with meaning. They had a very shallow understanding of what I was trying to talk about. And it's because I wasn't being allowed to understand things in the way that I actually should be understanding them, which is with that emotion. And so what I had to do was go back to my culture. I had to go to a lot of texts in sort of South Asian diaspora, in Pakistani, in Urdu, in Hindi, in a lot of Indian subcontinent communities, a lot of texts that came from them on the internet, and a lot of scientists who are trans, who are queer. I had to read up from their work. I had to go back to philosophers that talk about queer theory. A lot of writers many years ago who came up with a lot of ideas that we base queer theory on today. And I had to get kind of political with it, because I hate it when people say stop talking about politics, because politics defines us. It teaches, you know, it structures our system. So I had to get quite political with it. I had to really tear it apart and use things that people didn't really understand. For example, when I talk about dirt in the poem, that I relate it to my skin color and my name and everything, I have to go into my emotional connection to soil and to mud, and the emotional connection of cultures, of farmers, of people who've come before me, and that connection that they have to the soil and the ecosystem, and the way that we as human bodies are very similar in terms of our chemical makeup to soil and the structure of ground and soil. I can't talk about that in an essay, not really, not without citing sources, not without talking about things in a certain way. I had to let go of a lot of rules. And so I think that's probably the best way that I can say that I've done it. I've not been writing poetry for very long, so I'm not sure that I can give a full rounded answer as of yet, but hopefully that will grow to be, I don't know, more useful. And I love going into a conversation thinking, okay, I'm going to go into this in a way that I think I don't know anything about this subject, and I'd like for someone else to just tell me what they think. And it's from that we can almost grow commonalities about subjects. And then you understand the magic of intersectionality, because everyone can relate to at least one thing. That's the beauty of intersectionality, I think. So that's the ways that I've almost rebelled against the strategies and structure of scientific writing.
Yeah, so not try to impose viewpoints, but rather to kind of take the conversation how it goes. Yeah, and I think you kind of deliver a really important message there. You know, going back to culture, going back to roots, right? And that's the your organisation Queer Roots about. But you also spoke about, you know, unlearning, taking things apart, tearing things apart, also about uprooting, right? You know, kind of taking roots out, you know, unnecessary roots that are not, you know, productive and helpful for finding who you are and your voice. So I think that process of, you know, kind of learning, unlearning, and rooting and uprooting or unrooting, it's very important.
Exactly. I will say as well, just as a tiny little point, in terms of the whole idea of chaos, uprooting, and almost having that chaotic ideology about defunding or destroying a system, there must always be a system ready to take the place of that system when that system has been uprooted. Uprooting a system for the sake of chaos is not useful and very much against what the whole idea of what these communities and what our understanding of science is trying to do. And that's why learning is important. And that's why preparing this idea of queer ecology is very useful for when the other systems are taken down and these systems come back in to reteach how we learn about subjects. So it's very important, I think, to work on chaos and learning at the same time, because to cause chaos and to disrupt without a system that is in place to replace it is just wrong, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jasmine. I really enjoyed this, and I hope that the audience enjoyed this too. And so, yeah, thank you very much for your time and your insights and just, your amazing perspective on a lot of topics that are really important to the conference, but also, you know, to society as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for dealing with my tech issues as well. And I hope that I can, listen to the other talks as well, because like I said, it's all about diversity of perspectives. Don't just come listen to me and then no one else. Everyone else is a useful perspective to listen to, maybe even more so. I thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.